Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. The Daily News front page says it all. He's this close. Ferrer has big lead, but may not get 40% needed to avoid a runoff. With all the precincts reporting, he has 39.9% of the vote. Unfortunately for him, there is no rounding. To discuss the Democratic primary elections and the upcoming general election and the runoff, the candidates, the campaigns, the gaffes, the gotchas, as well as future opportunities and obstacles, are two of the four New Yorkers who have successfully run a New York City mayoral campaign. Former Deputy Mayor Fran Reiter, who ran Rudy Giuliani's 1997 campaign, and John LoCicero, who ran Ed Koch's mayoral campaigns. Folks, friends, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Nice to be here.
I don't know about you guys, but if I'm Freddy and the campaign, they took away my belt and my shoelaces. What is it like when you're that close? You have to figure, if I only got 35 votes, it's got to be nerve-wracking.
Well, let me just tell you, the biggest mistake he made was not knocking off the ballot Piccolo and Baruch. 5% of the vote was cast for those candidates. He probably wants to kill himself because he wanted to be politically correct, and he thought he was going to get the New York Times if he knocks those two people. Bloomberg knocked Agdamani off. You think the Times is not going to endorse?
So you think that the campaign made a mistake in doing that?
Major.
But wait a minute. Being, only dozens of votes short, there's so many opportunities for blame and guilt. I mean, how do you recover? What is it like in that campaign headquarters this morning in Ferrer?
Well, they're not happy, but I think here's the bigger point than not being happy. They're angry. And I think that anger is something that has dogged Freddy Ferrer perhaps throughout his career. He's the angry man.
Why are they angry?
Well, because they think it's theirs by divine right. I mean, throughout this campaign, typical of sort of Freddy Ferrer campaigns, but even more so this time, you hear all these stories coming out from his people that we're going to win, there isn't going to be a runoff, this is our year, it's ours, I've earned this, it's my turn. These are the kinds of things that you hear coming out of Freddy Ferrer's campaigns consistently. I think it's a huge turnoff to the electorate. It's a presumption that this is mine, that because I've been around for a long time, forget about my record, forget about everything else, this is mine. And it makes Freddy angry, and the anger has always come across when it doesn't turn out the way he wants it to turn out.
Okay. Yeah, but Doug, just to add to that, he thinks the election was stolen from him 4 years ago. He really believes he should have been the nominee.
John's right.
But
so that makes him even angrier.
Having said all that, how do you turn that into a winning runoff campaign strategy and then move that on to a serious contention with the mayor?
The first thing he's got to do, he's got to reach out to Virginia Fields voters and Virginia Fields. He wants to recreate the Black Hispanic coalition. First step was getting Sharpton. I don't know if Sharpton really helped him, but at least among his people, he thought that it helped. He thought he had 40% before Sharpton. He got Sharpton as insurance. But Virginia Fields is very important for him. When Ed Koch in '77, we had 22%, Cuomo 21%. We reached out right away. We pulled Herman Badillo away from them. We pulled Mayor Beam away from him. And we pulled the blacks away from him. In a runoff, you must move to make the field bigger for yourself.
But what'll be interesting to see is whether or not the ill will that exists between the two campaigns, particularly with Sharpton coming out at the 11th hour for Ferrer, and Barron was all over the television set last night, just lambasting Sharpton and Ferrer. So the question is, I think John's absolutely right. You've now got to go out to the losers and try to, and in this case, Virginia most particularly, and try to pull support from that camp. The question is whether or not, in reality, because on the surface it may very well look like, yeah, we're together, we're going to put this coalition back together. But saying it and actually doing it and working together over the next week, 10 days, to have it really bear fruit, that remains to be seen. If there is a lot of ill will that there appears to be, they may just walk away. They may stay home.
Right.
John, let's look at Weiner now. I mean, you're in the Weiner campaign. What is it like over there?
Well, he's euphoric.
Yeah, they're ecstatic.
You have to understand. I mean, the feeling when you're all the way down at the bottom, and you're moving in such a. I mean.
Explain 1977. You're reliving it. Do it.
There were 7 candidates, and Ed Koch was 6th of 7, and he was like known by 4% of the voters. Everybody said, you know, Ed's a nice guy, he's a congressman, but you know he can't win. When they woke up one week, when all of a sudden on a Tuesday we get the New York Post, on a Thursday we get the Daily News, and Citizens Union, all of a sudden the other candidates looked and they said, oh my God, this guy is credible. And we were moving 1%, 1%, 1%. And by the weekend of the Labor Day weekend, it was gorgeous, just like this yesterday. And he and Bess Myerson went campaigning all across the beaches on those beautiful days. And then Jewish holidays came, and I mean, it was just glorious. So Weiner, in that same position, I just said to you too before we came on, I saw him the day before. He says, I'm tied. You didn't think I could do it. I said,
well, there's a lot of that. He said the same thing to me. He said, Mr. Conventional Wisdom, look where I am now. Right. But the fact is that it began about 3-4 weeks ago where he and Gifford had been stuck in the bottom, and at one time Virginia was up, and then she collapsed, and it was the three of them. All of a sudden, Anthony began to take off in poll, and you described it perfectly in the 77
television commercials.
Right, and he was different.
He was different.
He separated himself.
He was different. John's right, he separated himself. He positioned himself as the moderate in this race, the outer borough moderate, the champion of middle-class, white, ethnic, outer borough voters. And again, I'm sure we'll get to this, that's why he's Bloomberg's worst nightmare. To the extent that Bloomberg has a worst nightmare, it's Weiner. Okay, I think he has
generally pleasant dreams these days.
But he defined himself for the first time within his commercials late in the game, very, very specifically. Until then, nobody really still knew who he was. He was of a bunch of candidates who were none of them were particularly well known outside of their natural constituencies. He pulled away by virtue of very clearly defining himself, did very well in the debates, insofar as he, at least, whether you like his ideas, think they're realistic or not, that's to be discussed in going forward. Right. But he sounded like, the perception was, and we know perception equals reality in most of these cases, sounded like he had something new to say, that he had policies, that he had the gravitas to be mayor, by the way, because he's a young guy and he looks young, and I think that was an issue for him. All of a sudden, here was this mature young man who at least appeared to represent, a very, very important constituency. Then he goes on air with effective commercials that reinforce all of this coming out of the debates, and he took off. Somebody had to take off because nothing was going on for months.
It was a snooze.
And he grabbed the brass ring.
I know people that switched from Miller to Weiner on the education.
Okay.
Where he talked about his mother and schools, and I mean, I like Miller, but his commercial, he's going to make 17 kids in a class. I don't know where he's going to get the space, and he's moving the chairs around. And he's not a janitor, but Weiner is talking about my mother's a teacher. He gets up, he hits the stickball.
Right. He's a real guy.
People my generation.
Come on.
That's what we
He's a
played
real
in the
guy.
street.
Also, I mean, being a Brooklyn, Queens guy myself, he had a little bit of edge. Also, he was very quick. He was articulate. He could think on his feet. He had a good sense of humor, and he could think outside the box. I was struck in the New York One debate, the first campaign finance board debate, and they asked, would he get arrested for civil disobedience? He said, no, I run the police department. Really? And it struck me. I said, wow, yeah. And there was buzz among the chattering classes, but it broke out. Now, was it in part what Miller didn't do, that Miller began with his, the flyers and
Miller's
then the campaign
major
finance?
mistake
Was running.
Well,
he should have run for borough president.
Yes, he should have run for borough president.
Kenny Fisher did that in 2001
Kenny
in
Fisher
Brooklyn.
screwed up. He would have had everybody's support if he had run for borough president. Instead, he ran for mayor, and then he decides to run for borough president.
Late.
Everybody was already gone. But what Miller did, as I said, a lot of us thought he should run for borough president, but he made a couple of major mistakes. That $1.6 million in mailing at city expenses, no one remembers that Peter Vallone did the same thing. But now
I defended the practice.
Now the press is focusing on it. Maybe cheap shot, but they took them fast.
Sure.
Then I thought the campaign finance board made a major mistake. You either don't give him the money or you give him the money. You don't put off the decision. So he screwed with $500,000 he couldn't use.
There is an issue here. I heard lots of complaints about the campaign finance board, their practice in this case, because it effectively shut down the Miller campaign because they were going to make a determination after the primary.
Right.
Okay. So we've got a sense of Fields, Miller, Weiner, and Freddie. Okay, let's look at the head-to-head. What does Freddie have to do? What is Freddie? You're Freddie's campaign manager. What does Freddie have to do to come out, win the runoff, and come out of it with a shot at Mike Bloomberg?
The big problem for candidates like Freddy Ferrer is that they are who they are, meaning they are the left wing of the party, even though they...
Is Freddie left wing, or is he really a moderate guy?
It doesn't matter.
Okay,
it's
the
perception. The perception of him is that he's been around a very long time, so he's sort of the old Democratic Party.
Right.
Remember, Weiner, I'm the new Democratic Party.
Right.
Resonated very positively.
He comes out of the Bronx, a machine.
Comes out of the Bronx, comes out of the machine. I go back to thinks it's his by right because he's been around so long. That's a very Tammany Hall kind of notion, that if you pay your dues and you're here forever, there's a pecking order and it's my turn.
So, but let me
you can't sell that to New Yorkers anymore.
Okay, so you're making a real strategic critique here. Let me just put in a broader context that there was a fundamental misconception of the nature of the campaign and the candidate, you're saying, by the Ferrer campaign, because they expected, in a sense, a coronation, and that they wouldn't have this opposition, and that essentially the Diallo remark derailed that.
But here's the problem for people, candidates like Freddie. It's not just Freddie. It's that when you have that history, you have to play to it because that's your base. The problem is you get into a head-to-head election, whether it's in a runoff with somebody very different from you or in the general election. And now all of a sudden to win, you have to get beyond your base. So the challenge for a Freddy Ferrer, and he's certainly not alone in this, is that how do I not turn off my base, but at the same time reach out to a much broader constituency? He has been playing this notion. He tried it early on in the campaign. In the last election, it was us versus them, poor versus everybody else.
At least some perceive that to be the argument. I don't quite buy the interpretation.
In this election, he made a very conscious effort early on to broaden in that still us against them, but that the middle class were part of the us. And the very wealthy were part of the them. It didn't really work for him. And towards the end of the campaign, because he knew turnout was going to be low and he really had to energize his base to get them out, and probably did. I think when we finally see where this very small turnout came from, he had more success than the others had at turning out their base. But now it poses a problem for him because now he's got to go after those middle class voters. And the question is, did they ever buy into the notion that Freddie was really for them? Or do they look at an Anthony Weiner? Do they look at a Mike Bloomberg because it's a very similar problem. Even if he wins a runoff, even if he doesn't have a runoff, he ultimately runs against Bloomberg. Can he convince that vast number of voters who are middle class, and by the way, they're Latino, they're African American, they're white, they're across the spectrum.
But racially, demographically, they're white.
No.
More. No, not exclusively.
They're not.
There's a big black middle
big black
class.
middle
I know,
class.
well, and in
How
fact,
does Freddie-
Bloomberg's going to get those votes
Well,
out of Queens.
okay,
Stayed
well,
home.
And they stayed home for this one.
That's
I mean,
right.
Flake,
That's
Mises
right.
District.
What does he
come
do?
on.
What does he do in certain parts of Brooklyn? What does he do in Southwest Queens?
Right.
These are middle class voters, and as we saw, I saw something very interesting actually on a New York One survey that was done last night, where education was not the number one issue for people who were
It was
calling in.
jobs.
It was jobs in the economy. If you're going to talk jobs in the economy, and you take a look at Freddy Ferrer and his history of more government programs, more government, the sort of the old-fashioned Democratic Party approach, versus an Anthony Weiner who is saying, great party, Democratic Party, need new
Wait a
approaches,
minute,
new
didn't I
ideas.
make you the Ferrer manager, and you just
Well, no,
just
no.
sounded like you're the
No,
you're giving the worst case analysis to the candidate.
What I'm saying is so that the challenge for the Ferrer people is, how do we craft a message in a very short period of time in a way that will resonate as loudly as possible that Freddy Ferrer has new ideas? If he's got policies, he better start talking about them, and he better be able to answer the question how to pay for them. He's not going to be able to get through with the kind of policy discussions that took place during the primary, which was basically no policy discussions.
Listen, if you analyze all the four candidates, I don't know where they're going to get the money. I mean, it was ludicrous. There was one question, I thought it was the dumbest question in the world. How are you going to get 8 million people out of the city of New York? And they're answering the question. Now, you tell me how. You can't even get the people in Manhattan out of Manhattan, let alone 8 million people out of New York. There's no, they want to do the politically correct answer all the time. Tony Weiner was the only one that said, hey, I'm going to be in charge of the police. Do you think I'm going to break the law?
Right.
No, that was the only difference between him and the others. Freddie never moved. Don't forget, he had 30-some% all during the primary.
Yeah, but you're
He
Weiner's
ran
campaign manager. You
Okay,
got to
if
tell
I'm a
me how
campaign
you. I want.
I'll tell you how Tony should win.
Okay.
And if I were running Tony's campaign, I would build up on what he said. This is a city that wants everybody to be able to earn a living, put their kids in school, get an education, follow up, give Bloomberg credit. He took the Board of Education over. We got to give him credit. It was a little chaotic, but what is he going to do in the next 4 years? I don't know what he's going to do in the next 4 years. This is what I'm going to do in the next 4 years. I'm going to create jobs. I'm going to have a safe environment for the children to go to school. I am going to be different from Freddy Ferrer and from Bloomberg. I'm going to make this city, for people in the lower run, to become middle class. Not, everybody has different ideas what middle class is, but everyone wants to be in the middle class. The poorest people think that, the working class people always think they're middle class.
Right.
They just don't have the money.
Right. And in fact, they are.
And so Weiner's got to build on this middle class value and separate himself from Bloomberg as a wealthy man who's has no feelings for the
Okay, let's
average
do
person.
some demographic vote counting here. Let's talk about race and ethnicity. How does Weiner get a substantial enough number of, and we talked a little bit, alluded to it earlier, black and Hispanic voters from Freddie? And then Freddie, conversely, his problem is to get a significant fraction of the white vote to build into his coalition. So, I mean, they face mirror image problems here.
He goes after the very...
No, who's he? Freddie.
Freddie.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was actually going to answer for Weiner.
Go ahead.
From Weiner's perspective, he going up against Bloomberg. He's going to have to try to bring back into the fold and convince that he can represent them minority voters, middle-class minority voters, and convince them that they've got to stay with the Democratic Party, that I'm going to best represent your interests. Freddie's got a tough time bringing middle-class white voters to his column.
Why?
Because they don't perceive that he is for them. His messages have always been very, very narrow visioned. They don't buy
last week
it.
he reverted.
They don't buy it.
He reverted to the two cities
Right,
again.
right.
Because
Well,
he
so I
saw what
said-
happened in the
That's right.
hurricane, and he thinks he's going
Right.
to, build on that hurricane.
Right, and
The
that may have won him ultimately the primary. It'll very likely lose him the election.
Okay,
though.
let's jump forward a bit. We'll do a little.
But the key
Quentin
vote for both of
Tarantino.
them is to get the blacks are going to be the deciding figure.
Right now,
Of who becomes the mayor, whether it's Bloomberg or Freddy or Weiner. They're the key. Everybody always said the Hispanics. I mean, if Tony Weiner wins the primary, the runoff, well, then the Hispanics and the blacks are up for grabs.
Right.
well, don't forget. I mean, Bloomberg the last time got 47% of the Hispanics.
Well, why?
And, well,
Why?
I mean, because of
they
the war
shut
between.
down the Bronx
Okay.
because they wanted to screw Mark Green.
So is there residual resentment here? I mean, talk about the impact of 2001. What happened, and what might be the result?
Besides Mark Green screwing up and 9/11 happening, but the animosity towards Green from the Hispanics, they sent out the message that he was racist, which was the most unfair thing in the world. Mark Green has fought more than any other
For
candidate.
decades.
Okay.
And they pinned him as a racist. So a lot of Hispanics believed it, and they stayed home. They closed the doors in the clubs.
And the implications, though, for this election.
For this election, I think there's a small amount of resentment among Green supporters. Some were black and some were white. That he really got screwed, and that he should have been the mayor.
Okay.
Freddie has, number one, Bloomberg's worked very, very hard in minority communities. One of the things that whoever runs against Bloomberg is going to have to contend with is that there is I believe, completely justified perception that Bloomberg has united the city. That he's managed to accomplish or to continue much of the Giuliani turnaround of the city. Crime continues to drop, quality of life maintained. All of those issues that we come to
Education
associate.
potentially
and
improved.
education
No, but besides
improved.
that,
But at the
Fran-
same time, he did it without alienating, and crime continuing to drop, without alienating or being perceived as targeting minority New Yorkers. I can't think of a 4-year period in this city, certainly in my lifetime, where we have had greater racial harmony and ethnic harmony than now. So what does that mean in this race? For Bloomberg, it means that there are going to be an awful lot of minority New Yorkers who are going to support him.
Right.
I would contend far more than he needs to put together a winning coalition.
There's no racial tension, very little, if any, racial tension in the city. I mean, I travel the subways all the time, and there was a period of time you were in the subway, you looked around, you made sure everything's fine. You get in the subway now, people are talking to each other, it's crowded.
Okay.
What he has
Go
done,
ahead.
well, I mean, everybody, no one mentions, and I'm sure he's going to tell us, September 11th, we lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. Hundreds of thousands of jobs. That I work downtown, as she does. I mean, you couldn't walk. I mean, it was terrible. People lost their lives. He had to raise taxes. They're blaming him for raising taxes. If he hadn't raised the taxes, he would have been back in 1975, laying off
Or the Financial Control Board could have taken over.
Right.
Correct.
So what you're saying is it's going to be very difficult for these guys to beat Bloomberg. And what I'm hearing from you, they ain't beating them.
I didn't say that.
No.
Well, okay.
He can be
I didn't see it
taken.
either.
Tell me how he's taken.
Well, listen, I thought we were going to win an election until Bensonhurst occurred and there was a murder. The last time there was a beating in Howard Beach and Bensonhurst, no one got killed, thankfully. Bloomberg, boom, went right there, and he diffused those.
Right.
And he's got a commissioner, Ray Kelly, who has just been fantastic.
So what you're saying is he could
But
only beat
anything
himself,
can
but he's
happen
not.
in New York.
So-
You can have a hurricane.
Right.
You can have a blackout. Listen,
But he's
Ed
got to
Koch
blow
wouldn't
it.
be mayor
He's-
without that blackout.
Oh, I understand that, but doesn't the mayor have to blow it, and he's shown no inclination to blow it?
People make mistakes in life.
Okay. So it's this
Bloomberg
unexpected.
can beat Bloomberg.
Okay. But
That's
but
it.
it's this unexpected catastrophic event that seems to be, the
Which can
element
happen
out
in
there.
New York.
Okay.
I mean, I also think that you can't completely discount the fact that the enrollment in this city, while increasingly independent, that the registrations in this city are still predominantly Democrat. What Bloomberg's got going for him, along with a whole lot of other things, is that I don't think most people think he's a Republican.
He's not. He's a liberal Democrat.
Right. So,
He's more liberal than Freddie.
Right. So, but the truth of the matter is that the enrollment is still stacked heavily in the Democrats' favor. So while I think it's highly, highly doubtful and probably would require a catastrophic event to make it happen, you can't discount the fact that anything can happen in an election, and this is still a predominantly Democratic city. I think that applies more to Weiner than it does to Ferrer.
Right.
Because Weiner does have because their bases are very similar, Weiner does have the opportunity to say to Democratic voters, you know, if you're thinking about voting for Mike Bloomberg, you really should stay with the Democratic Party, and you've got a Democrat to vote for who's
a real Democrat.
Who's a real Democrat.
Okay.
So, well, no, not only a real Democrat, but who is not a wacko Democrat. You know, it's somebody who's the moderate, who's really, you know.
Well, Sharpton accused him of being a right winger.
Right.
That may be a plus in certain
no, that's right. So it's possible, but it's unlikely.
Okay, and then we haven't mentioned the variable, the $5 billion bank account, where the mayor can draw on a check any amount of money he wants, unlimited
money
resources.
Money can only go so far.
Right. I don't believe it plays a real role at this point.
I think that he may be overspending, but clearly they're not taking a chance with this. This is total war. Even last night, he holds a celebration.
Right.
They're sucking all the oxygen
But that was
out of
free
the
media.
room. Right.
I mean that was a brilliant move. But that was free media.
Right.
Paid media, number one, you can overdo it.
Right.
And it can start to turn people off. And it will, and if you really overdo it, it'll start to remind people just how much money he has.
2 seconds left.
2 seconds.
Go.
You know where his money, it was how he got the unions. That's where his money, how he used government rather than personal money.
Sure.
How he used government
Olympics, Jet
to
Stadium.
get the 32 BJ. Forget the Jet Stadium. He got 32 BJ with the private developers to make those guys a union in Brooklyn. He got DC 37.
He's attacking all the foundations of the Democratic Party. Okay, predictions.
But he didn't
Quick.
do it with
Stop.
personal money. I'm
no,
sorry.
not personal money, but public money. Predictions. Weiner Ferrer runoff.
I really don't know, Doug. It's too close. Ferrer wins, gets 40%.
No.
No, I'm sorry. You're talking
runoff.
about,
If there's a runoff.
If there's a runoff.
Right.
If there's a runoff, Weiner.
He's going to get the 40%, and if he doesn't get the 40%, Freddie's going to win.
Okay, Weiner or Freddie versus Bloomberg?
Bloomberg.
Bloomberg.
We're going to have you guys back because this is on tape.